Hi there, and welcome to Tammy Talk TV, where we share ways to build a healthy, happy life. As you may know, I've been on break for the past few weeks, but I've decided to take a break from the break to make a video and talk to you about how we can consume news responsibly. Now, the first question, of course, that you're going to ask is, who am I to be an authority on how you should consume news? But the truth is, I was a newspaper and magazine editor for more than 20 years. And for about 5 of those years, I worked in hard news, occasionally politics, but hard news in general. And hard news can really wear on you after a while. So after about 5 years, I backed away into more features and lifestyle design content. And unless you've worked in that industry, you don't really think to question where those stories come from. You know, it's like I ask you, where did that steak come from? And you say, from the grocery store. Because that's as far as you care to track that back, as it came from the grocery store. But to eat meat responsibly, we have to look further back than that. Okay, so news is the same way, right? If I say, where did you see that news story? And you say, on the television. That's not good enough. We need to know what sourced that story. We live near the fire department. If you hear sirens, it's because there's a fire somewhere. Anyway, though, we need to know where that news is sourced from. And what a lot of people don't realize is that news broadcasting is considered an entertainment industry. So yes, it is news, and yes, they are giving you news, but they're giving it to you in the form of entertainment. Now, the first rule of entertainment is to give your audience what they want. So in news broadcasting, what that means is to choose stories and deliver them to that audience that they believe that audience will enjoy. That's just good business. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's also part of the business to give it to that audience in such a way that keeps them coming back for more. Again, just good business. But if you understand the way that business works, then it keeps you from going down the rabbit hole with that story, because you can't see the news from a rabbit hole perspective. You have to see the news from a bird's eye view. So you need to back up and look at where that news is coming from and see it in the context of the day, not just the rabbit hole that your preferred news organization has led you to, because through no fault of their own, they believe, and probably correctly, that this is the kind of thing that interests you, and so they just keep you coming back for more. But the truth is, where news is concerned, sometimes we have to back up and look at things that we may not find as interesting, but that actually relate to that overall picture that we need to see. So in the structure of news broadcasting, underneath all the broadcasting mediums, there are actually news agencies, 2 that are most relevant to the news that we see today, and that is the Associated Press and Reuters. And so the way that works is, the news agencies are actually known as news wires. And that's because this concept is so old, it used to come across the wire. The actual telegraph was how these stories were dispersed across the nation. So probably 80% of what we see at a national level is coming across a news wire. And the way that works is they pay for a subscription service, therefore they can log on to the wire and pull very raw stories. So when you see a wire story, it's just raw footage with no voiceover and text. And then as the news organization, you pull that story from the wire and you put flesh on the bones, right? You build it out from there. You localize it with quotes from individuals in the local area. You pull statistics and figures and related pieces. You build that story up, but it comes from the bones of what's on the wire. Now, the wonderful thing about YouTube is that both Reuters and the Associated Press have their own YouTube channel. So every morning I wake up and watch the AP News Minute. It's 60 seconds that hits the highlights of what's going on all over the world. And Reuters also has a series of little short segments that just gives you a good recap of what's happened in the world. Then you can take those stories, plug them into the search engine, and find your favorite broadcasting organization and what they've done to expand that story. So it's a great way to look at what's the raw news and then build it from there. Now, on the flip side of that, if you see something on a broadcasting organization that comes through to you and you think, that's strange, I'd like to know more about that, Then you can just go to the YouTube page for Reuters and the Associated Press, plug that into the search engine, and search for the original stories where that was built from. So it goes both ways. You can see it on the news wire and then look for a more fleshed out story on that subject. Or you can see a story that you think, gee, I wonder where they got that. You can back up and go to the wire and find out exactly where it came from. In a lot of cases, not always. But now, that's just a really basic overview of where a lot of our news comes from. Is there are these two main wire sources, the Associated Press and Reuters, and I'm going to link them both above and below. But those are the two main news wires. And from there, broadcasting organizations, and when I say that, I mean newspapers, magazines, television stations, radio broadcasts, all those news organizations are pulling content from this primary source material. So there you have it in a nutshell as to kind of the progression that news takes before it gets to you. Okay, so step 2. Now that we know where it comes from, how can we consume it responsibly? Well, the first thing we have to do is take a step back from those emotions, because news is emotional. It actually impacts our daily lives and the lives of those that we love. So news is emotional. You have to find a way to put a barrier between what you're seeing and what you're feeling. Not a complete barrier. I'm not saying you have to be cold to what you see on the news, but you have to have a filter. Otherwise, it will break your heart all day. So first of all, you have to be able to take an emotional step back from it. I understand it's important, but you're important too. Your sanity is important too. So sometimes we just have to take a step back emotionally and see it, but not feel it quite so much. And that keeps us from joining into the mob mentality, because that's what we see a lot. And if you'll think about it, we've all been caught up in these kinds of situations where a year later you look back and you think, good God, that doesn't even sound like a good idea. How did I get into that? Very often it's through a group, because you get a few members of a group sort of leading the charge, and it's really easy to just fall into that flow. So if you can take that emotional step back, it will keep you from falling into that mob mentality mind frame that we don't even realize is happening until it's too late. So just find that emotional filter and use it when you watch the news. And after that, we have to be really careful to stay away from stereotypes. Now, we talk a lot about stereotypes on Tammy Talk TV and in our Everyday Vacay e-series. But just in a nutshell, a stereotype is when you judge a group of people based on the actions of a few. So we have to stay away from stereotypes, because just because someone is different does not make them your enemy. It makes them different. And so if we see everybody that is different as our enemy, the world becomes a very hostile and, frankly, a rather boring place, because I don't want everybody else to be just like me. Isn't that what this great American experiment is all about? I mean, my neighbor may not look like me, may not worship like me, may not be in the same income bracket as me. But you know what? We're still neighbors. We're still in this experiment together, and it's a beautiful thing. So if you'll, again, take a step back emotionally and realize that just because someone is different does not make them your enemy. Just because they have different views does not make them your enemy. It simply makes them different, and that's what makes life interesting. So embrace the differences and realize when there's a stereotype, because not all stereotypes are negative. There's no such thing as a positive stereotype, but when we say something nice about a group of people, we disguise that as a positive stereotype. But the truth is, when you draw an assumption about a group based on the actions of a few, it's just not a nice thing to do. So, back away from the stereotypes, put your emotional filter on, and be aware if you feel yourself falling into that mob mentality. Okay, so that's step 2. And step 3 is very closely related. It's to back that stress level down. Because when we get up in the mornings and watch the news, first of all, we take about an hour of just quiet time. We read a little bit, we might journal a little bit, but we take about an hour of just quiet time before we turn on any electronics, and certainly before we turn on the news. Because news is incredibly stressful. And stress is one of those things that whether you view it as fear, anxiety, or excitement, the physiological response in the body is exactly the same. The blood pressure rises, the heart starts to pound, we get anxious and irritable. It's the same thing whether it's anxiety, excitement, fear, that physiological response is exactly the same. So we have to find a way to undo that stress. Now, I can't get into that entirely in this video because it takes quite a while, but I do have an entire playlist. I think it's a total of 6 or 8 videos dedicated to how to rest when you're stressed. And again, I'm going to link those both above and below. So if you're having trouble either resting or sleeping, and believe it or not, that's 2 completely different things. But if you're having trouble with either one, just visit that series and give it a quick watch, because they're only like 3 to 5 minutes a piece, and it will help you, it will give you some tools to help you relax and release some of that stress. Now remember, there are more resources available on TammyTalk.com. We are launching the Everyday Vacay e-series in February, and we would love to have you join our social circle. So check it out in the description box below, and be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you get a reminder when there's a new video. Okay, until next time, here's wishing you much health and happiness.